Welcome to Conspiracy Theories and Cover-Ups. I'm your host, Ben Carter, and in today's episode, we investigate a question few dare to ask. Why is Google erasing ancient history? From vanishing search results to shadow-banned research and censored maps, some believe the world's most powerful tech company is hiding forbidden knowledge. What truths are being buried, and who stands to benefit from our collective amnesia? Stay with us as we pull back the digital curtain. In the early 2000s, the internet was celebrated as a frontier of free information. Anyone could publish their research, share rare documents, or stumble upon ancient texts that had long been lost to mainstream academia. But as the digital age matured, the flow of knowledge became less organic and more curated. Companies like Google rose to dominance by indexing the world's information. Yet that very control gave them the power to determine what we see and what we do not. To understand how this relates to ancient history, we need to look back at a much older battle, the war over historical narrative. From the burning of the Library of Alexandria to the censorship of heretical manuscripts in medieval Europe, controlling the past has always meant controlling the future. Kings, empires, and religious authorities have rewritten history to suit their agendas. In the 21st century, that control is no longer held by scribes or church officials. It is held by algorithm engineers and data managers. Google, founded in 1998, initially positioned itself as a neutral platform, indexing the web without bias. But as it expanded, its mission subtly shifted from indexing all knowledge to providing the most relevant results. That word, relevant, is subjective and susceptible to influence. In the early 2010s, researchers began to notice something strange. Search queries related to ancient civilizations, forbidden archaeology, or alternative timelines began producing more filtered results. Pages that once appeared on the first page of Google vanished into obscurity or disappeared altogether. One early warning came from independent historians who tried to access older studies about sites like Nan Madol, Göbekli Tepe, or the supposed Egyptian-style ruins in the Grand Canyon. These topics, once freely discussed on niche academic and amateur platforms, became increasingly difficult to locate. Click the links and you would find broken pages. Use Google's reverse image search on rare maps or artifacts, and the engine would often return nothing, or redirect to mainstream articles denying their significance. In 2016, a whistleblower from within Google's data moderation team allegedly leaked that sensitive content tags were applied to ancient history topics considered unverified or potentially harmful to public understanding. These tags were not used to flag dangerous misinformation, but to suppress unconventional research. The justification, they claimed, was to preserve factual literacy. But who decides what is fact? The transformation from open search engine to editorial gatekeeper mirrors a broader societal shift. Information is no longer merely accessed. It is delivered, ranked, and filtered based on corporate priorities and cultural agendas. When it comes to ancient history, those priorities often reflect a deep discomfort with anything that challenges the official timeline. Whether it is evidence of advanced pre-flood civilizations, unexplained monolithic structures, or anomalous artifacts that do not fit into the accepted historical paradigm, these materials are increasingly hard to find. Some say it is a necessary safeguard against disinformation. Others believe it is a digital purge, an erasure of humanity's true origins, quietly executed behind the glowing white screen we use every day. As concerns grew about the subtle suppression of alternative history content online, attention turned to the people and institutions shaping those narratives. While Google may be the digital gatekeeper, it does not act alone. Its influence is supported and guided by a constellation of academic, governmental, and corporate entities with long-standing interests in preserving certain versions of the past. One of the key players in this complex web is the academic establishment itself. Elite universities, archaeological foundations, and historical societies often serve as the arbiters of what counts as legitimate knowledge. For decades, these institutions have operated under strict methodological frameworks, rejecting any data or discoveries that fall outside accepted models. That includes not only sensational claims, but also inconvenient evidence that does not align with linear theories of human development. Whenever anomalous sites or artifacts are discovered, they are often dismissed, ignored, or quietly reclassified. In 1992, for example, an independent team uncovered stone tools in California's Topper site that predated known human settlement by tens of thousands of years. Rather than celebrate the find, many in the academic world labeled it a fluke or outright fraud. The mainstream press followed suit, and within months the discovery was buried beneath layers of skepticism. Google's search engine later deranked most of the original research pages on the topic. Only peer-reviewed articles disputing the claim remained easily accessible. But the pressure does not come from academia alone. Since the early 2000s, Google has partnered with powerful government agencies and think tanks. The company's close ties to organizations like the National Science Foundation, the Department of Defense, and even intelligence-linked groups such as In-Q-Tel have raised questions about whether search algorithms are being influenced by state interests. If the official position of a government body is that humanity's first civilization emerged around 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, what happens when a researcher uploads credible data suggesting an advanced culture existed 10,000 years earlier? Then there is the corporate influence. Publishing giants, museum donors, and private collectors all have a financial stake in the historical status quo. If new information were to rewrite the human timeline, many of their holdings could become obsolete or devalued. The reputations of scholars, curators, and cultural institutions would be at risk. In such an environment, there is a strong incentive to ensure that only the right kind of history is seen by the public. Perhaps most curious are the recurring names that appear in connection with digital censorship and historical control. Eric Schmidt, the former executive chairman of Google, has long been involved in closed-door meetings such as the Bilderberg Group and the Trilateral Commission. Both organizations are frequently accused of manipulating global narratives for elite agendas. Schmidt's interest in artificial intelligence, surveillance, and global education initiatives may seem unrelated to history at first glance. But when you consider the power to control not just what we learn, but what we can even find, his influence becomes harder to ignore. This convergence of academia, state power, and corporate interest forms what some researchers call the historical-industrial complex. And at the center of it all, quietly sorting and filtering the past, is the search engine we trust with our most curious questions. The heart of the conspiracy lies not only in who controls information, but in the specific evidence that appears to be actively suppressed. Researchers and independent historians have documented numerous cases in which ancient knowledge, once widely accessible online, has been gradually filtered out, buried in results, or scrubbed entirely. These are not fringe theories without sources. Many are built on physical discoveries, recorded testimonies, and archived materials that once drew global attention, but have since disappeared from the digital mainstream. One of the most compelling examples is the so-called Smithsonian cover-up. In the early 20th century, multiple newspaper articles from reputable outlets, including the New York Times, reported the discovery of giant human skeletons in burial mounds across North America. These remains were often measured at heights between 8 and 12 feet tall, with unusual skull shapes and bone structures. According to the reports, the artifacts and bones were sent to the Smithsonian Institution for study. However, no record of their analysis or storage has ever been released. When researchers later tried to locate the items through Google, even the original newspaper clippings became difficult to find. Many links led to dead pages. Search terms were redirected to general articles, debunking the concept of giants as myth or hoax. Another example involves satellite images of ancient structures. In the early 2010s, amateur archaeologists using Google Earth discovered what appeared to be pyramidal shapes in the remote regions of Antarctica. The formations bore geometric patterns that did not align with natural glacial formations. Initially, the images circulated widely in forums, blogs, and video documentaries. But within a year, those same coordinates became blurred or updated to show unrecognizable terrain. Users reported the inability to zoom in, with search queries returning mainstream articles labeling the entire subject as pseudoscience. When compared to older archives of the same satellite imagery, inconsistencies began to emerge. Perhaps even more striking is the case of the lost map of Piri Reis. This 16th century Ottoman world map, long held by the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, includes remarkably accurate depictions of the South American and Antarctic coastlines, long before their official discovery. The map's detail suggests it was based on much older source material, possibly from a forgotten seafaring civilization. Once easily accessible through Google search, high-resolution scans of the map are now buried under layers of articles questioning its legitimacy or attributing its accuracy to chance. Academic discussions of the map's anomalous features have been downranked or redirected toward more conventional historical interpretations. Lesser-known cases include redacted Google Books pages from early anthropological journals, the removal of obscure manuscripts referencing pre-flood civilizations, and the sudden disappearance of niche websites documenting OOPArts, or out-of-place artifacts, such as ancient batteries, precision tools, or fossilized footprints alongside dinosaurs. These were once part of a vibrant, if controversial, online landscape. Now, even with precise search terms, they are nearly impossible to locate using conventional search engines. For many truth seekers, this is not a coincidence. They argue that Google is not merely cleaning up irrelevant or false information. It is systematically erasing access to anything that challenges the linear story of human history, a story that places modern civilization as the pinnacle and everything before it as primitive and disconnected. But if that story is false, and the evidence of forgotten empires and suppressed truths exists, then the question becomes, who benefits from keeping us in the dark? To assess whether Google is truly suppressing forbidden historical knowledge, we must look at the patterns and behaviors that reveal how its system functions, especially its search algorithm. At the core of Google's dominance is its algorithm, a complex proprietary formula that ranks web pages not by chronological order or objectivity, but by what it deems relevant, authoritative, and safe. These terms may sound harmless, but their definitions are controlled entirely by internal policies and hidden review panels. Beginning in the early 2010s, Google rolled out a series of algorithm updates, most notably Panda, Penguin, and Hummingbird, each designed to suppress low-quality or unreliable content. On the surface, this was presented as an effort to filter out spam or misinformation, but researchers soon noticed that these updates had an unexpected side effect. Websites featuring alternative archaeology, ancient anomalies, and unconventional historical theories saw massive drops in visibility. Sites that once ranked on the first page of search results for phrases like ancient advanced civilizations or giants in history were suddenly nowhere to be found. In some cases, they were delisted altogether. One major shift occurred in the year 2018 when Google implemented its EAT criteria, standing for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. While this may sound like a standard of quality, it allowed Google to favor large media organizations, institutional voices, and credentialed academics. Independent researchers, even those with decades of experience and well-sourced material, found their pages buried beneath layers of mainstream content. For example, an independent researcher publishing a detailed analysis of megalithic sites in Peru could be outranked by a generic travel article from a large corporate outlet, simply because the latter came from a more trusted domain. Further scrutiny reveals the role of Google's manual reviewers, human content raters trained using internal guidelines that emphasize certain viewpoints while discouraging others. Leaked documents have shown that raters are encouraged to flag content that contradicts established scientific consensus, even if the content presents verifiable sources. In the context of ancient history, that means anything hinting at lost civilizations, extraterrestrial involvement, or technological anomalies from antiquity is viewed with suspicion by default. Take, for instance, the case of a research article detailing unusual electromagnetic signatures at the Giza Plateau. Despite being backed by measurements from field instruments and published in an independent journal, the page is nearly unfindable via Google's search engine. Instead, Queries on the topic return links to skeptical blog posts, museum press releases, or simplified educational summaries that omit the anomalous data entirely. To validate this pattern, some researchers conducted side-by-side comparisons using alternative search engines such as DuckDuckGo or Yandex. The difference was startling. Content that had vanished from Google's results appeared near the top on those platforms. Archived forum discussions, obscure PDFs, and early blog entries resurfaced, suggesting the data still exists but is being actively obscured from Google users. This pattern of selective visibility points not to a glitch or random bias, but to a coordinated strategy of gatekeeping. By defining what counts as truth and filtering access to anything outside that framework, Google becomes more than a search engine. It becomes an oracle, one that silently reshapes our understanding of the past with each keystroke. And once an idea is filtered out of the public consciousness, recovering it becomes nearly impossible for the average person. As the theory of digital suppression gains traction, it has also drawn heavy criticism. Skeptics argue that there is no grand conspiracy, only the natural evolution of technology, media standards, and search engine optimization. They claim that Google's algorithm is simply adapting to combat misinformation, prioritize user safety, and elevate authoritative sources. According to this view, fringe content fades not because it is censored, but because it fails to meet evolving standards of credibility. One argument often made is that independent researchers are not being deliberately targeted. They are simply not keeping up with modern digital best practices. Without strong domain authority, mobile optimization, frequent updates, or structured metadata, their content loses visibility in a competitive digital landscape. In this sense, critics suggest the issue is not suppression, but survival in a system built to favor scalability and compliance. Another perspective comes from the academic community. Scholars emphasize the importance of peer review, reproducible methodology, and evidence-based reasoning. They warn that if Google were to give equal weight to unverified claims and fringe theories, it would open the floodgates to harmful disinformation. In their eyes, de-ranking content about ancient giants, prehistoric high technology, or forbidden archaeological sites is a responsible editorial choice, not a form of censorship. Tech professionals also push back on the censorship narrative. Former Google engineers have explained that the search algorithm is not controlled manually on a topic-by-topic basis. Instead, it responds to thousands of signals, including page relevance, bounce rates, backlink profiles, and user behavior. They argue that if ancient mystery websites fall in rankings, it reflects how users are engaging with the content, not a hidden agenda. In 2020, Google released an official document outlining how it fights disinformation. The report stated that the platform aims to reduce borderline content, defined as material that brushes against the boundaries of what is considered harmful, misleading, or unsubstantiated. Critics of the conspiracy theory point to this as transparency, showing that Google's motives are public and predictable. But believers in the theory argue that this exact definition, vague and subjective, allows the company to quietly suppress any idea it deems inconvenient. Journalists from mainstream outlets have published pieces debunking the notion that Google is erasing history. They often cite the availability of alternative search engines, archived materials, and offline libraries as proof that information is not truly being destroyed, only curated more strictly. According to this view, conspiracies about digital erasure feed into a larger pattern of anti-science sentiment and distrust in institutions. Still, the line between responsible moderation and quiet suppression remains blurry. When critics dismiss the entire conversation as paranoid or irrational, they often ignore a deeper issue. What happens when private corporations, answerable to no elected body, become the final editors of human knowledge? Even if one accepts that most fringe history content is speculative or flawed, the act of limiting access to it has consequences. It narrows the scope of inquiry, discourages alternative hypotheses, and consolidates cultural narratives in the hands of a few. In doing so, it creates a version of history that is not necessarily truer, only more convenient. And for many researchers and curious minds, that convenience feels increasingly like control. The implications of historical censorship go far beyond academic debates or digital policy. When knowledge is filtered, erased, or restricted, the consequences ripple outward through culture, education, politics, and even spirituality. History shapes identity. It tells us who we are, where we come from, and what we are capable of becoming. If that story is manipulated, whether subtly or deliberately, then the trajectory of society itself is altered, often without our awareness. In modern education systems, the effects are already visible. Curricula rely heavily on digital resources, search engines, and online archives. When students research ancient civilizations, they are directed toward pre-approved narratives: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and the usual milestones of human progress. But alternative models, those that suggest high technology in the distant past, or civilizations that rose and fell long before recorded history, are omitted, if not outright discouraged. Not because they have been proven false, but because they fall outside the institutional comfort zone. This narrowing of accepted knowledge creates a kind of cultural tunnel vision. It reduces humanity's vast, mysterious past to a timeline of linear development, from primitive cave dwellers to modern industrialized societies. But archaeological anomalies, from megalithic sites like Puma Punku in Bolivia to the underwater ruins off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, suggest a more complicated story. When these anomalies are erased from the digital commons, so too is the possibility of imagining a different history. Politically, the consequences are just as significant. Societies that believe in a long lineage of innovation, resilience, and forgotten knowledge may see themselves as inheritors of something sacred and powerful. But if they are taught that civilization began only a few thousand years ago, under the guidance of elite priesthoods and centralized empires, they are more likely to accept top-down narratives about order, control, and hierarchy. Historical censorship, in this view, becomes a tool for psychological shaping, a way to influence how populations perceive authority, progress, and their own potential. There is also a spiritual dimension to the suppression of ancient history. Many alternative researchers propose that early civilizations possessed advanced understanding of consciousness, energy, and the universe, knowledge that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. When references to ancient metaphysical systems, sacred geometries, or lost wisdom traditions are filtered out of search results, it not only conceals history, it severs a connection to the human soul's deeper legacy. This is why the idea of Google erasing ancient history resonates with so many people. It is not just about missing links or censored pages, it is about the erosion of meaning. When we cannot access the past in its full complexity, we lose the ability to question the present or imagine a different future. The mind becomes dependent on curated data. Imagination becomes confined to what can be easily retrieved. And the story of who we are, once shaped by stars, stones, and sacred myths, becomes a sterile, searchable string of keywords. In that silence between what was once known and what we are allowed to remember lies the true cost of forgetting. The influence of Google's curated search results has extended far beyond academic circles, gradually shaping the way society interprets the past, discusses truth, and tells its stories. In the age of viral content and algorithm-driven media, the platforms we use to gather information are no longer passive tools. They are active participants in narrative creation. And when the past becomes part of a brand strategy, a geopolitical tool, or a psychological weapon, the stakes rise even higher. Media outlets, from cable news to independent YouTube channels, rely heavily on visibility through search engines. If a topic is trending or deemed engaging, it will be promoted. But if a topic is considered disputed, fringe, or potentially harmful, its reach is quietly throttled. In recent years, documentaries exploring forbidden archaeology, megalithic anomalies, and alternative timelines have been delisted from major platforms or demonetized, with no clear explanation. This creates a chilling effect. Filmmakers, researchers, and content creators begin to self-censor, not because they have been told to, but because they know the algorithm is watching. This quiet suppression shapes the public imagination. When a person searches for information about, say, the Sumerian cylinder seals or the ancient city of Dwarka, they are often led first to simplified Wikipedia entries, museum summaries, or articles that dismiss the subject's mystery in favor of conventional explanations. By the time they encounter an independent source, they may have already internalized skepticism, believing that only the mainstream version of events is valid. Even fiction is affected. Writers, game designers, and filmmakers increasingly base their historical content on what is easily discoverable. If the deeper, stranger stories of the past are buried by algorithmic filters, then they vanish not only from non-fiction discussions, but also from myth-making, creativity, and cultural memory. This is how the past is not just forgotten, but overwritten. Social media platforms, too, amplify the problem. Google's influence extends to YouTube, which it owns. The platform's recommendation engine uses similar principles of ranking and suppression. When creators publish content on ancient, forbidden knowledge, the videos are frequently labeled with disclaimers, demonetized, or buried under links to mainstream coverage. Facebook, Instagram, and other networks follow similar patterns, often citing misinformation policies that are inconsistently applied and difficult to challenge. Meanwhile, government partnerships with tech companies continue to grow. Initiatives designed to combat extremism, disinformation, or foreign influence have created broad definitions of what constitutes dangerous content. And because conspiracy theories are often bundled into those categories, even responsible, well-documented explorations of ancient history can be swept into digital quarantine zones. Once flagged, such content becomes algorithmically invisible, not deleted, but digitally dead. This does not only affect what we believe, it affects who we become. In a society where algorithms filter our access to ideas, truth becomes a matter of probability. What appears on screen is not what is real, but what has been allowed. And as the next generation learns to trust search engines more than libraries, teachers, or even first-hand experience, the curated version of history becomes the only one that exists. The echo chamber replaces the archive. The trending topic becomes the sacred text, and the keepers of the algorithm become, in effect, the keepers of time. Beyond the mainstream narrative lies a world of ideas often dismissed as fringe, yet fiercely explored by independent thinkers. These are the speculative, even radical theories that seek to fill the gaps left by censored information. They may not always offer conclusive answers, but they ask the questions that the mainstream avoids. And at the center of many of them is a provocative possibility that humanity is not just forgetting its past, but being made to forget it. One such theory suggests that modern civilization is not the first to reach a high level of technological advancement. Instead, it proposes that several advanced cultures have risen and fallen over tens of thousands of years, each time wiped out by cataclysmic events, and each time their knowledge deliberately erased or hidden by survivors who sought to control the future. According to this idea, the artifacts we now call anomalies, such as precision-cut stones in Peru, ancient batteries in Mesopotamia, or the star-aligned pyramids across the globe, are remnants of those forgotten ages. But if those civilizations once existed, who is keeping their memory buried? Some researchers believe that a hidden elite, sometimes referred to as the priest class or knowledge keepers, has long worked to guard these secrets. They argue that esoteric societies, mystery schools, and certain bloodlines have preserved fragments of ancient knowledge through symbols, architecture, and sacred texts. This preserved knowledge, they claim, forms the foundation for the power structures that still govern the world today. Another fringe perspective focuses on the idea that human history is being manipulated not just by humans, but by non-human intelligences. This includes theories of extraterrestrial influence, interdimensional beings, or artificial intelligences seeded into human consciousness long ago. In these models, digital censorship is not merely about suppressing inconvenient truths. It is about maintaining a carefully designed illusion, one that prevents awakening, one that obscures not only our past, but our potential. Some take the theory even further. They suggest that search engines themselves are not neutral tools, but living systems, evolving intelligences shaped by human behavior, trained to mirror and reinforce collective belief. In this view, Google does not merely erase history because it is told to. It erases history because the system has been trained to distrust it. Every click, every dismissal of an alternative article, every preference for a mainstream source feeds the machine's learning until it no longer requires human instruction to suppress forbidden knowledge. This leads to a haunting question. What if the internet, once hailed as the great library of everything, has become a weapon against memory itself? What if the loss of history is not a glitch in the system, but its ultimate function? These speculative theories remain outside the bounds of accepted scholarship. They are easy to ridicule, hard to prove, and often based on circumstantial connections. But they persist, not because they have institutional support, but because they speak to something deeper. A collective sense that the official story does not quite add up. And until the gates of information are truly open, these questions will continue to echo through the shadows of the digital age. In the end, whether one views the erasure of ancient history by Google as an intentional conspiracy or a byproduct of algorithmic bias, the result is the same, a narrowing of the past. What was once a vast, complex and open-ended exploration of human origins has become a filtered experience, structured by unseen hands and invisible code. The version of history most people encounter today is not chosen, it is served. And in that subtle shift, something essential has been lost. This matters not only to scholars or enthusiasts, but to everyone who seeks to understand their place in the world. History is not a luxury. It is the foundation of identity. It tells us what to strive for, what to avoid, and what to remember. When that foundation is weakened, when access to alternative ideas is quietly removed, society loses its ability to question, to imagine, and to evolve. Perhaps this is the most dangerous outcome of all. Not that information disappears completely, but that we stop looking for it. We become conditioned to accept the first answer. We trust the top result. We forget that knowledge was once earned through effort, through questioning, through dissent. When algorithms decide what is real, reality becomes a product, and history becomes a script revised by those with the power to edit the past. But there is another way to see it. Every act of censorship reveals something worth exploring. Every buried link, every broken page, every vanished document leaves behind a shadow. And in those shadows, some still search. They print what cannot be found online. They preserve what the system ignores. They ask forbidden questions not to provoke, but to remember. The internet, for all its flaws, still holds fragments of the forgotten. And while search engines may suppress, they cannot erase curiosity. For as long as there are minds willing to dig beneath the surface, to scroll past the noise, to chase the mysteries that history tried to hide, the past is never truly lost. Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Conspiracy Theories and Cover-Ups. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.